It was a quiet spring evening in London when I, Dr. Watson, received an urgent note from my friend Sherlock Holmes. When I arrived at our rooms on Baker Street, I found Holmes standing by the window. He looked tired, his knuckles were scraped, and there was a smear of blood on his coat. "I've been busy," he said calmly. "It's been a dangerous day." Holmes told me that someone had tried to push him in front of a carriage that morning. Only his quick reflexes had saved him. That wasn't the only attempt on his life. A heavy brick had fallen from a rooftop, almost right on his head. Holmes was certain these were no accidents. "They found me at last," he said. "Professor Moriarty." I had heard the name before. Holmes explained that Moriarty was a genius in crime, a man who pulled the strings behind countless evil deeds across Europe. Holmes had been gathering proof against him for months. Now that Moriarty knew, he was trying to stop Holmes, for good. "He is the Napoleon of crime," Holmes said. "I am the only one who can bring him down." Holmes had a plan. The police would soon arrest Moriarty's men, but Holmes himself needed to vanish before Moriarty could strike again. He asked me to go with him, immediately, on a journey across Europe to keep us both safe. I agreed at once. Whatever dangers lay ahead, I would not let my friend face them alone. We didn't waste a moment. Holmes and I left Baker Street under the cover of darkness, slipping through the streets like shadows. Holmes had changed his clothes and even his face. He was a master of disguise. I could hardly recognize him myself. "We must be careful," he whispered. "They'll be watching every train, every road. We'll have to outsmart them." Instead of taking a cab, we walked through quiet alleyways and back streets. More than once, Holmes paused and stared behind us. Though I saw nothing, he was certain we were being followed. At last, we reached Victoria Station. Holmes had already arranged everything. We boarded a night train, and just before it pulled away, Holmes gave a satisfied nod. That should shake them off, for now. As the train rolled out of London, I looked back at the city fading into the darkness. We didn't know where Moriarty's men were, or how close they had come. But for the first time that day, I saw Holmes relax ever so slightly. Our escape had begun, but the chase was far from over. The next morning, we left the coast of England behind and crossed the sea to France. Holmes stayed alert the entire time, his sharp eyes scanning every passenger. "Moriarty is clever," he said, "but I intend to stay one step ahead." From France we boarded a train that carried us swiftly through the countryside. Fields and villages blurred past the windows, but Holmes never seemed to relax. Even as we sat in our compartment, he spoke in a low voice about the danger still close behind us. "Moriarty himself has followed," he said quietly. "He's left London. He knows I've escaped." I was shocked. "You mean he's chasing us in person?" Holmes nodded. "When the spider leaves its web, Watson, you know the matter is serious." We pressed on through the rolling hills and rising mountains, heading for Switzerland. A quiet place Holmes believed would be safe, at least for a little while. Snow still clung to the peaks, and the air turned crisp as we climbed higher. But even in such peaceful surroundings, Holmes never let his guard down. The game was still on. After days of travel, we arrived in a quiet little Swiss village called Meiringen, tucked among snow-capped mountains and deep green forests. The village felt calm and safe, with neat houses, winding paths, and kind-faced people. We checked into a small inn, where the innkeeper welcomed us warmly. Not far from the village were the Reichenbach Falls, tall, roaring waterfalls that crashed into a rocky gorge below. Holmes stood for a long time staring at them, the wind tossing his coat, the spray from the falls misting his face. "How glorious," he said. "Nature at its most wild and powerful." Just then, a local boy arrived with a message. It was for me. "There's a sick English lady nearby," I read aloud, "and they need a doctor urgently." Holmes glanced at me and smiled faintly. "Go at once, Watson. I shall be perfectly safe here." I hesitated, but he insisted. "I'll wait for you at the inn," he said. So I left, never guessing that I was walking straight into a trap. The boy led me down a narrow path, through the trees, and toward a cottage on the edge of the village. But when we got there, I found the house empty. "No one here," I said, puzzled. The boy looked nervous. I must have the wrong place," he stammered, then hurried off before I could ask more questions. A cold feeling crept over me. Something was wrong, very wrong. I turned back at once and rushed toward the inn. When I arrived, Holmes was gone. "He left some time ago," the innkeeper said. "A tall gentleman came to speak with him. They went off together toward the falls." My heart sank. A tall gentleman, Moriarty. I ran from the inn and followed the steep path that led to the Reichenbach Falls. The air was thick with mist, and the ground slippery beneath my boots. In the distance, I could hear the thundering roar of the water. At last I reached a narrow ledge near the edge of the falls, and there, lying among the rocks, was Holmes's walking stick. But Holmes was nowhere to be seen. The spray from the Reichenbach Falls filled the air like fog. The path was narrow and slick with mist, curling along the cliffside high above the crashing water. I called Holmes's name, but only the roar of the falls answered. Then I saw it. Near the edge, beside a boulder, lay his walking stick, and pinned beneath it, a folded letter with my name. With trembling hands, I opened it and began to read. "My dear Watson," it began. Holmes had known the message about the sick lady was false. He let me go because he believed this would be the end, and he couldn't risk my life. He had been right. Not long after I left, Professor Moriarty appeared. "I am quite sure you have very few matches left in your box," Holmes had told him. Holmes described their final conversation, standing face to face above the falls. Moriarty offered him one last chance to back down. Holmes refused. "You hope to beat me," Moriarty said. "If I were sure of the result, I would hardly call it a gamble," Holmes replied. The note ended there. Holmes wrote that he could not escape without risking more lives. He believed both he and Moriarty would fall, and that it was better that way. I stood there, stunned. 2 sets of footprints led to the edge. None returned. There was no sign of a body, only the endless roar of water and mist curling into the sky. I knew then that my friend Sherlock Holmes had given everything to stop the man behind the world's darkest crimes. And he had vanished into the spray. The next morning I returned to the falls with the local police and the hotel keeper. Together we examined the narrow path where Holmes and Moriarty had walked. The ground was wet and rocky, but the signs were clear. 2 sets of footprints led to the very edge of the cliff. None came back. We found no blood, no broken branch, no torn cloth. Only that both men had gone forward, and neither had returned. Far below, the water roared through the gorge, wild and impossible to search. We discovered something else too, a small silver cigarette case Holmes always carried, and a torn scrap of paper where he had scribbled a few last words. It wasn't much, but it was real. The Swiss authorities agreed with what I already knew in my heart. Sherlock Holmes had died there, locked in a final struggle with the most dangerous man in Europe. And he had won. With Moriarty gone, Holmes had broken the web of crime that had spread across half the world. The cost was heavy, but he had never hesitated. I stood once more at the cliff's edge, the spray on my face, listening to the endless rush of water. There was no statue, no memorial. Just the sound of the falls, and the knowledge that somewhere in that cold white mist, the greatest detective the world had ever known had vanished. I returned to London alone, the weight of Holmes's disappearance heavy in my heart. The city bustled as always, unaware that its greatest detective was gone. I sought out Holmes's brother, Mycroft, and told him everything, the chase, the dangers, and the final stand at the falls. Mycroft listened quietly, nodding as if he had known all along. Word spread slowly but surely. The newspapers told the story of Holmes's brave last battle with the criminal mastermind Moriarty. People mourned the loss of a man who had saved countless lives with nothing but his mind. For my part, I wrote down all that had happened, keeping it safe in these pages, so the world would remember the truth. Though the days turned into weeks, and the weeks into months, I often found myself looking toward the Alps, wondering what might have happened on that wild cliff. Had Holmes truly fallen? Or had he found some secret way to escape? But the world had to believe the story as it was. Sherlock Holmes had sacrificed himself to stop evil, and in doing so had become a legend.